Welcome to Sober Solutions. We are a weekly recovery podcast not affiliated with any particular 12-step or recovery program. However, you may hear us mention them. My name is Jason, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Ben. I'm an alcoholic and addict.
And welcome back to Sober Solutions podcast. Tonight is episode 40. And we're going to be talking about isolation as it relates to recovery, really how we relate to that. What are some of the signs that we see when we are in isolation, if we see the signs ourselves or the signs of others, and what we can do to help other people out with that. And a big question that I have for us this evening is if wanting to be alone is the same of isolation. But to get us kicked off tonight, why don't you start us out, Chris?
Absolutely. I think we focus around early recovery, and one of the things that happens when people start their early recovery is isolation. Generally, you're coming back from rehab, and something that gets pounded in your head is people, places, and things. And part of that is avoiding people and situations that you have been accustomed to, whether it's your dealers or the friends that you're using with, or just general locations. So what I found for myself is you get back from rehab and you're avoiding all of these people and places, and you kind of go into this state of isolation. And I think something to note is there's a big difference between isolation, loneliness, separation, and just avoiding things. So when I think of isolation, I really think more of the negative connotation. I'm sure we'll discuss that there's both positives and negatives, but when I think of isolation, it's when you're alone and when your mind starts to wander. I'll speak in the I sense, but when I'm alone and I'm scrolling through social media, I tend to have these bad feelings. I'm jealous of other people. I'm thinking negatively, or I should say I used to think that in early recovery. I'm not so much at that stage now. I think I've learned, I've practiced to not isolate in a negative way. But early on, I just remember sitting in my room, feeling bad for myself, scrolling through Facebook or Instagram and just seeing all these perfect lives. And unless I trained myself, which I ended up doing, to be thankful, be grateful for what I have, you kind of go down in this rabbit hole. I talked about social media, and we've talked about social media, and I really can't stress enough that those things, when you're isolating, and I'll go away from social media, but I just remember as I was scrolling, like I said, going away from all the things that I learned in rehab. So you learn to meditate, which is positive. You learn to be active and stretch and do all these things. And like I said, when I think of isolation, it immediately led me to not do any of those things.
So you talked a little bit about people, places, and things, and trying to avoid, those triggers or those scenarios or those people that, would get you closer to a drink or a drug. So if people didn't go to rehab and, they're trying to get sober on their own, what can they do to stay away from that isolating feeling? If you're newly getting sober, you don't have these tools yet. What are some of the things that you think helped you start getting into a sense of community that got you out of that old pattern of those people, places, and things, and started creating this new pattern of a sober life?
Yeah, one thing to note is, and I'll get to that, is when I got out of rehab, and I know you said, what can people do if they don't go to rehab and kind of gain those tools? One thing to note is it's the first time when you stop using or drinking, it could be the first time that you actually get to know yourself. So you're with this person alone that you don't even really know. You're discovering who you are. You're at, through the next couple months or even years, you're essentially meeting a new person. So I think one of the first things to note is be honest with yourself, and understand, be very cognizant that you're going to feel feelings that you haven't felt before. So what I would say is keep a journal. And so that's one thing. Another would be definitely over communicate with positive people, with people that you respect. You know, if you're working a program, people within that community. So, I've said it many times on this podcast, but I talk to people every single day. I call you guys, even if it's to, bullshit around. I'm talking with people and not isolating in a negative way. I said keep a journal. Going to meetings, whatever meeting it is, going to a meeting will instill a sense of community, a sense of purpose. And I would say keeping yourself distracted and connected. So when I say distracted, joining that volleyball group that you've always wanted to do but never had time for or ever committed to because you were using. Join a sewing class, join a this thing, go for that walk, go to the gym, do something to be distracted and also connected to some greater thing other than drugs and alcohol.
I like that a lot. For our listeners, most of you know that we don't have any recommendations for any type of program. But if you're not in a program, it may be a little bit harder to find that sense of community. And Chris, I love your ideas. Join a gym, join a league of some sort, a sports league of some sort, join a sewing circle, join, something that has other people in it, because I think that sense of community, especially for me, really brought me out of that idea that I was alone. And that's where that isolation concept really comes in for me, is that I always felt like I have to do this by myself. Every single time that I was trying to get sober, I would either hear it from my partner, I would hear it from other people like, oh, do you really need to do this? You're going to miss out on so many things. And that wasn't true, and I know that now, because I chose a different route, and I chose to get active with people that had similar interests with me. I'm now on a kickball league and a dodgeball team, and I have all of these different activities. I go to the gym a lot. Like, it's just being around other people, even if I'm not engaging with them. I know a lot of people make a lot of friends at the gym. I just go and I work out. I don't really make a lot of friends there. I don't really talk to anyone, but I go and I'm just around other people, and that really takes me out of myself. So Ben, how about you? How do you relate to isolation, and what was it like for you when you first started getting sober?
Um, Isolation at the beginning was interesting because I got out of rehab and I went to my parents' house, and so I was not really isolating because they were always there, which was super helpful. But um, I did spend a lot of time in my room, just kind of contemplating, you know, everything that was going on at the time. But isolation at that point wasn't a bad thing, because I needed to sit with the emotions that I hadn't felt for 10 years, so, and experience them. And that was one of the things that, a therapist early on told me, to really, you got to sit there and you got to sit in it. You got to sit in the sadness and the pain, and you have to feel it, not wallow in it, but you have to feel it. So isolation early on was a much different thing than it is now. But I think very soon after, getting out of rehab and getting into the rooms and doing IOP, there was there was this sense of community that really helped. Like, and so I didn't necessarily feel like I was isolated, because I would start with a 7:15 meeting, and then I and then I would go to a group at 10, so like half the day, like, I would come back after lunch, and I had not been isolating the entire morning. So, I really didn't, even looking back on it now, it didn't seem like I was isolating, for that second half of the day or whatever. It was just, I think I had my fill of people at the time, and I know we'll, get to that, is being alone the same as isolation. But yeah, I haven't had an experience. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think that, because, it's kind of to what you guys were talking about joining leagues, or, just being active, or just doing something that incorporates other people. And I did all those things, joined hockey again. I think it's important to have the, in recovery stuff that you can avoid isolation, but also the out of recovery stuff. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's between a 7:15 meeting every morning, and then this podcast once a week. Like, it's very hard to isolate and not open up. And also seeing a therapist weekly. Like, it's hard to isolate. I shouldn't say it's hard to isolate. It's very difficult to not, in the current situation I have, it's difficult for me to go an extended period of time with not opening up emotionally.
I feel like you're trying to say it's hard to feel isolated while you're doing all those things in a negative way. So it's the feeling behind it.
Right.
Well, I guess my question then becomes, living with someone else, whether that be you moving in with your parents, with your girlfriend, with a partner, if someone's living with someone, can they isolate while still living in the same house with someone? I mean, you mentioned that you were in your room a lot, so I think that having that proximity to people doesn't necessarily mean that you're not isolating, because Chris, to your point, I think isolation is also a state of mind too.
Yeah, I can comment on that one. When I got back, and even throughout my recovery over the last 14 months, when my wife and I are in a bad state, when we are not doing well, when there's trust not there, I never feel more in that negative, isolated mentality. However, the opposite is true. When we're connected and talking and laughing, I never feel the opposite and happier. So I completely agree. You can feel that negative isolation, that state of mentality that we're talking about, even being right next to someone, even sleeping right next to someone. So it's definitely, and for me, it's more of a mental state than an actual proximity to people.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely, you can be in the same house as somebody and isolate from them. That's not really a hard thing to imagine or achieve. I think we've all achieved it in and out of recovery. But yeah, for me, isolating, like, I've always been kind of an introvert. So like, I've always been, I've always enjoyed isolation, like even as like a teenager and, stuff like, and I was always we say you come for your drinking, you stay for your thinking. Like, my thinking's always been active and consumed a large part of, my, I was going to say my thinking's consumed a large part of my thinking, but that is just about as redundant as it gets.
Wait,
but
what is it? Come for your drink and stay for your think? I've never actually heard that.
Yeah, come for your drinking and stay for your thinking. And so, I always used to do like a lot of self-talk, as a teenager, when when I started becoming a young adult, and, just being in my parents' basement and just kind of trying to talk myself through certain things. It would, that was dealing with anxiety or control issues. Like I was trying to work that stuff out. Um, so now when I isolate, even in a house with somebody else, and it could be for whatever, because we need our space, or, we need, just time to, again, sit in those emotions. And so I still do some self-talk, but it's my head's a little quieter now. So I'm able to kind of think through those emotions. And so even when I'm engaged in that separation, with somebody, while still being in the same house as somebody, it's not it doesn't, for me, it doesn't turn to that negative isolation. I don't let it turn to, a pity party or woe is me, or start thinking externally. I choose to look internally and think about my thoughts, my behaviors, my motives, what my intent is, and trying to work through that and trying to figure out if it aligns with, the way that I'm trying to live.
So it sounds like isolating, or maybe it's called something else, but isolating has some upsides to it. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 1,000%. Like it's, you know, I think that, and going back to the, the end of my, active drinking, there was a lot of, alone time spent kind of lamenting, you know, my lot in life, lamenting a marriage that really wasn't working and didn't feel like it was working, lamenting that I couldn't stop drinking, um, just really feeling bad for myself. And so, you know, but because I was drinking and I wasn't in the right frame of mind and I wasn't spiritually fit and I wasn't emotionally healthy, that is what made it negative. But to be in the state of mind that I am now, isolation has a lot of positives to it, because I'm thinking about, you know, I'm not thinking about myself in a negative way anymore. I'm thinking about myself in a positive way. And if there is a negative thought, it's how can I change that? How can I adjust it? How can I fix it? I think isolation, for those who, it's easy to see isolation for me with going to a daily meeting every day, and the cast of characters, and who's a regular, and who comes in, at 2 weeks or 30 days, and and they're a ball of fire for, to 90 days, and they get to 6 months, and then they're gone, and then they come back and they're counting days again, and they'll say the same thing, that they began to isolate, that they began to pull them, they felt that they didn't need to still work a program, and again, echoing what Jason said before, that, we're not advocating any 12-step program, but it's not about a particular program. It's about living by a code, a set of values, ethics, morals that you have the courage of your convictions about. It's not about, like, and however you find that, that's really what we talk about. It's about finding that way of living that makes you want to be a better person. And so when you isolate, and you isolate from that, you then just turn it back in on yourself. And if you're not spiritually fit, if you're not emotionally, and I wouldn't even say, I'll even pull that back. If you're not in a good emotional place, because spirituality is not for everybody, religion is not for everybody, 12 steps aren't for everybody, 4 steps aren't for everybody, CBT is not for everybody. I get it. But if you aren't emotionally on a solid base, as soon as the mind is a tricky thing, and as soon as it turns in on you, it just starts feeding on itself, and before you know it, you're back to the things that made all that stuff go away, whether that's a drink or a drug.
I would counter what I said in the beginning with you don't know yourself, and that could be negative, and that could leave you in this mental spiral with the opposite. It also, if you're cognizant about what is going on, you can get to know yourself. You can learn how to be an adult. You can learn how to be fill in the blank. It gives you time. You can do those activities. It just, in the beginning of recovery, it can go either way. And, Ben, you touched on the negative a little with, the isolation can make you start going to meetings and then, yada, yada, yada. They might relapse or they might not. But there's sometimes no getting around isolation in the sense of being around people. And honestly, it's something that's very important in the beginning because you don't want to be around the same people, the same situations. You want to make changes in order to change your life. And it's just about having a plan to manage those changes. So, Jason, you live alone. I would say from the sense of living with people, especially out of rehab, how did that work with you when you got out of rehab, and what were the positives and negatives with your isolation when you got back?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I had the fortunate privilege of having my father stay with me for a month after I got out of rehab. We got along pretty well, and I even made that conscious decision and choice to make sure that we got along well, because at that time he was still a trigger for me. We were still trying to do this relationship dance of really understanding each other and not trying to get into each other's way. So I had that person there for me. But after he left, it was me diving into meetings. It was me making a conscious effort to reach out to people. And, I honestly don't think there's very many upsides to the COVID pandemic, except for one. It made me and forced me to reach out to people. I called people more. I FaceTimed people more. I went to Zoom meetings. Zoom meetings pretty much saved my life. If it wasn't for Zoom meetings, I may not be sober anymore. Because
I can echo that sentiment.
I knew you
echo
would.
that sentiment.
I knew you would, Ben. I knew you would. But I think, it's in all reality, it's so true, because I know that before, when I was trying to get sober, I would go to a bunch of meetings for about 90 days, maybe a little less, and then start saying to myself, it's 20 minutes away, it's half an hour away, it's an hour away. And still to this day, I really don't have very many meetings in my local town. I think there's a handful. I just haven't looked for them, because I go to major cities around me that have more meetings. And now it's easier for me because I go to dinner with people beforehand. I, have, like you were saying, Ben, I have those people in the rooms that if I don't show up to a meeting that I regularly go to, I get a text message that night or the next morning saying, hey, didn't see you at the meeting. Is everything okay? I have the gratitude group now. We've been keeping this gratitude list going for at least a year, maybe longer. And if I don't send a gratitude list, or someone else doesn't send a gratitude list, we're checking in with each other. Hey, what's going on? You okay? What's up? And it's that level of community that has kept me sober. I care about other people in the rooms, and other people in the rooms care about me. And so even when I want to isolate, I'm really kind of not allowed to, because people love me so much and I love other people so much that I know that isolation is a killer, and it will take me out faster than anything else, because when I isolate, I think about all my resentments. I think about my fears. I think about all of that shit that I used to do, and the shame and the guilt come back. And like you were saying, Chris, it's those thoughts that get into my soul that say, sobriety is really not worth it to me anymore. So if I do what I need to do to stay away from that, then I'm going to remain sober.
I mean, it would be a crime if we were not cheering, Zoom, and I didn't chime in. But it really is so true. I would not have to. There's no chance I would be as active as I am in my program if it wasn't for Zoom. Like, Zoom literally is the thing that it takes all of those excuses out. Like, because like you said, Jason, like, finding this meeting, like, COVID was a built-in excuse. Like, it was not a built-in excuse, but like, and that's still something that I hear a lot of people say, that they prefer in-person meetings. Like, I don't, like, okay, whatever. Like, sure. Like, I don't care where the message is getting delivered. Like, I just care that I'm getting it from somewhere, and so I would, and again, like, going back to what I said before about being an introvert, like, I would not have been able to, I don't want to say I wouldn't have been able to, but I don't think early on I would have had it in me to overcome the anxiety of finding a meeting, going to a building that I don't know, trying to find the right door to go into, if it's in the basement of a church, where is it? I just, I would not have done it, and I would have found an excuse. And so Zoom takes that out, in that you don't have it. You don't even have to put pants on, and you can get the message of recovery with Zoom. Like, there's no excuse. My sponsor lives in the Philadelphia area. Like, it just, and so I think for me, one of the reasons that I haven't had that negative isolation impact yet, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but like you were talking about, Jason, that community that has been built just, through Zoom, it takes away that isolation, because people care about you. Like, one of the things that I do is the CPP, which is escorting med students into AA meetings, and that forced me to go and try other meetings. And so once I found some, it kind of opened up to that, and said, let them know, said, hey, listen, this is what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, we love it. It's great. And so I've brought a couple of back a couple of times. And like it's just a room full of friendly faces that like I don't know if I could have gotten that connection without Zoom. And so the network of people that care about you, like you said, like I got a handful of buddies in my regular meeting that, one in particular, and we text all the time, like, and he'll be like, bro, it's time for a share. Like, you haven't shared in a little bit. Like come on. And like, he gives that push, and that's that community, like, that you just, that I think, honestly, just building any way you can build the community, the network, that it just goes such a long way to avoiding isolation, because you finally feel a part of something that's worth sticking around for.
So this comes back to the question of, if I want to just be alone, if I don't want to be around anyone, if I just want that time to myself, and Ben, you were talking about this a little bit before, Chris, you were talking about this a little bit before, but if I just want to be by myself, is that the same as isolation?
I think that loneliness is not the same as isolation. People can be isolated or alone and not feel lonely. And on the contrary, people can be surrounded by a ton of people and yet still feel extremely lonely. So, I think that it's really just about knowing thyself. It's about knowing yourself and knowing how you feel at that time. I don't think it's a bad thing to, Ben said he was an introvert. And I know a ton of introverts, and they get their energy from being alone, from reading, from, recharging that way. And, that can be healthy. However, it also can be unhealthy if that's not who you are. So, I mean, Jason, I personally, and this is just from an outsider's perspective, I feel like you're an extrovert. So, and I could be completely off on that. But if I were to see, so. Yeah, you don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, all right.
I think you're right on that one.
Let me say, Jason, are you an extrovert or introvert?
So I would probably identify myself as an extrovert.
Okay, so if I saw you staying at home and isolating and not coming out and not reaching out and not talking to people, personally, I would reach out to you and see if something was wrong. On the contrary, Ben, on the other hand, I would feel like that's more on the normal side, and that's him recharging, getting his energy.
Yeah, like it's so true. Like one of the things that I honestly look at, like, sometimes I just want to be alone. It really is, Chris, like, to that point, like, just a need to recharge and just kind of like wipe the slate clean and just be like, kind of, inventory the emotions and what you've done and what just kind of take stock of it. For me, I just kind of take stock of it and put it in its place and discard what I don't need. And I just enjoy just sometimes sitting in the peace and quiet, whether it's, watching a game or, building a Lego set. I got a beauty of a 1,000-piece lunar lander over here that my brother gifted me. Oh yeah. Don't give me that face, Jason. I'll tell you what, it is one of the most peaceful places I could ever get to. And it's quiet, and but my brain is still working, and it's sometimes that's just what I need. And so, yeah, I don't think wanting to be alone is, Chris, I think you nailed it right on the head. You got to know thyself. Like, you have to know why you want to be alone. If you want to be alone because you want to run from things and you don't want to deal with things, then that's not going to help you, because those things are you're eventually going to feel, you're going to get tired of feeling that way. And then you're going to go back to the thing that helps you forget, and the things that we're trying to run from, they never go away.
There's this amazing chart that, Jason probably knows it, but the Myers-Briggs chart. And it's a bunch of questions. I think it's like 150 or 200 questions. And you come up, there's 16 boxes that you can have. And it's really good for employers to take. My mom used to assess people with this chart. But what's interesting about that is I've taken it over the span of years apart. And I used to be what was an ENTP, which I won't go into the whole thing, but the first letter is either E or I, which is extrovert or introvert. And I used to be an ENTP, and I've changed now after rehab, after retaking it. Our company does this, and now I'm an introvert. So something to know, we're going back to knowing thyself, know thyself, is you can change, and you will change throughout your life, throughout changing, throughout recovering.
Yeah. And, Ben, while you were talking, I was just thinking to myself about how uncomfortable that would be for me. You thrive in being able to sit there and put that Lego set together. I would go crazy because I'm not doing it with someone else. I'd be like on my phone, or I'd be calling someone, or I'd be, seeing if my best friend wants to go to Mexico, like anything to like not just be alone. And I think there may be something there too, that sometimes I need to slow down and be by myself. That has a positive to it as well, without me being isolated. Being alone and being with my thoughts after 17 months of sobriety, and just taking that time to chill and relax and unwind and not be so wound tight is a challenge for me. It really is. And I think that when I get to do that, whether I go to yoga or I meditate at a meeting, it helps me recenter a little bit And because I was always in my addiction, I was always running from myself, always running from myself. Now, because I'm sober, it's less me running from myself and me just wanting to continue to live my best life, and for me, that means doing activities with other people. Where for you, Ben, that's you putting together that Lego set,
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on it is, it's listening to it back. It reminds me that that I really, my ex-wife used to think that I just didn't want to share my Legos, and it wasn't that. Like with my youngest daughter Anna, she's 6, so she really didn't get into Legos. But my oldest Julia, she loves Legos, loves them. But like very early on, like that was one of the things we bonded over. But I was like very adamant, like, listen, I'm not helping you build sets, like, because when I first built, I just raced through and built them. I built them for her, and like there was no shared experience. And for me, it's just because it's not about a shared experience. Like I love that she loves Legos now, but it wasn't about a shared experience, because I needed to do it because I do it my own way and I separate by color and all this. And, and it's just this mental health exercise for me that really does calm me down and just kind of lets me be at peace. And so, yeah, it was interesting hearing that back, but I don't think I'm going to get to it tonight. Like I said, it's over 1,000 pieces. That's a weekend project.
Well, there you go. And I think that's a perfect way to wrap this episode up. So, great conversation. If you do struggle with isolation, reach out to someone. Don't wait for someone to reach out to you. Be proactive in trying to get out of your own isolation. And if you can't, send us a message. We'll connect with you. We'll chat with you. We'll help you get out of that isolation mentality as best we can. And, the last thing I'll say is, whether your friends are introverts or extroverts, especially the introverts, don't be afraid to just check in on people. You never know what people are going through, and that friendly text from you may be what turns the corner for them. So great episode tonight, guys. And as always, each and every one of our episodes is dedicated to the still sick and suffering alcoholic and addict, especially the individual who's going to pick up for the first time tonight. Have a great night, guys.
Have a great night.
Have a great night.
We appreciate your liking and subscribing to our podcast. If you liked what you heard today and would like to support our podcast, feel free to Venmo $1 to our virtual basket at Sober Solutions Podcast. We want to hear from you too. If you have a comment, question, topic, or would like to come on the show, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Sober Solutions Podcast. Or you can shoot us an email to sobersolutionspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And if you like what you've heard, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show.